Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell and student Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to do a special tonight, and that is to discuss a gathering that I was a part of today. It was a question and answer session that was taking place at the Harvard Club in New York City. I'm recording this on Wednesday at about 9:23 at the moment p.m. So at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. roughly, Mayor Eric Adams from New York City spoke, and it was talking about observations, challenges, and the future of New York City. All right, so they passed out a program. There was a few rooms that this was taking place in. The early individuals that registered were able to sit in the Harvard Hall, and that's this room here, if you can see it. And I was there. I was in the center, about 4 rows from the front. The first 2 rows in the front were reserved for special guests. And then I was the 4th row in the center. And they had a platform and they had 2 leather chairs. One was the moderator, and obviously Adams was on the other chair. Adams, when you're looking at the stage, Adams was on the right, the moderator was on the left. The moderator's name is Stephen Younger, who ended up getting a law degree, and he was also a alumnus from Harvard University in '77, and he ended up getting his law degree in '82, I think it is. I think it's '82. Now, he's done the moderator, obviously he has a lot of experience with law, right? He submitted things to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. I guess they're called court admissions. U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, U.S. District Court for Eastern District of New York, and then U.S. Tax Court. And then the one that was setting up this event is Miss Lou, and she's an architect that also went to Harvard. I think she went there for her master's, and she's been part of the club since 2009 doing these kinds of events, the high profile events. So Mayor Adams, for the ones that don't know, is the mayor of New York right now. He's the one that replaced de Blasio. A lot of people in New York didn't like de Blasio. So this lecture is to basically give you my observations of what transpired in the room that I was in with the mayor, with this moderator. The moderator took questions. We had to write on cards the question, and he went through and asked questions based on the cards. But before he did the Q&A, there was an introduction of the mayor's life and how it formed him. So I want to briefly say, I'm not going to go into any detail because you can probably find that on Wikipedia. But what I found interesting about him is that he's been a lifetime New Yorker. I did know that, he was part of the NYPD, so he's a police officer. And I think that when you're dealing with people that are police officers, firefighters, military personnel, I think that there is a certain sense, especially when you dedicated a decent amount of your life towards it, moved up the ranks, you build up leadership skills. All right, it's not the only way to build up leadership skills, but I think that is that's a good pool to get true leadership, especially at the local level, municipality level, the city level, right? Maybe even at the state level. So, you know, he was a part of the NYPD. And he was talking about his mother. This is the part I didn't know. He was talking about, you know, the struggles, you know, when he was a kid, and the problems that, you know, her raising children, you know, back when he was, you know, being raised. I don't think Adams is that much older than I am, honestly. And, you know, how that formed his thinking, right? So some of the questions, so before the Q&A, you know, he gives this kind of like really short story of his life, right? And then Younger ends up asking, you know, questions. Now, in the room, the temperature of the room, of the, you know, the people in that room, in the Harvard Hall, that before the mayor walked in, most people were like charged, right? They were upset, all right? And I think this is like one of this thing sold out in almost 1 hour once it was released to register for the main room, and then they opened up further rooms to simulcast. So they had, you know, they had big screens in other rooms that you could see. But I was in the main room with Mayor Adams, and there was about probably 250 people in the main room, and then subsequent rooms. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 subsequent rooms upstairs. I don't know. I don't know how many people were upstairs, but it sold out in a very short amount of time. That doesn't normally happen with these events, all right? So that's kind of a rarity. The point I'm making is that before the mayor walked in, many people were, you know, they don't like the crime, they are upset about the cost of living. Those are like the 2 big issues that was on everybody's mind. Now you gotta remember, not everyone's wealthy, not everybody is wealthy at the Art Club. And you know, you have different demographics. You have an elderly group that may have done very well, maybe, you know, when I mean well, upper middle class, and then you might have some that are upper middle class, and you know, but and you know, you have younger people within this strata too, you know, different areas of their life socioeconomically. All right, so there's a good range of people that are in the room. Now, everyone in there is highly educated, right? So when the mayor walks in, people were kind of like almost didn't even want to clap. It was weird. It was weird, but then it warmed up. The room warmed up because of Younger. Younger is kind of like this, kind of like a little bit overweight lawyer type, kind of like kind of relaxed when he speaks. So probably because he's spoken to a large crowd for a big part of his life, you know, he felt very comfortable. And I think he kind of diffused the room very quickly. And then people then stood up and then started clapping, right? But the room was charged because of the negative feelings of what is happening in New York. Now, many of the problems that are happening in New York are not Mayor Adams's fault, okay? I was totally dead set against de Blasio. Now, what happened with Mayor Adams is de Blasio ends his term. He doesn't have to be, it was the end of his term. You can't rerun, right? There's term limits. So, you know, Adams kind of positioned himself to be the better mayor compared to de Blasio as de Blasio was exiting. De Blasio was terrible. Crime started to increase, graffiti started to increase, homelessness started to increase, drug abuse started to increase, and COVID and all the problems that the city is still going through, and a huge deficit. So Mayor Adams gets elected and he has to pick up from de Blasio's mess. All right. But the two things that were really important from people's perspective is feeling safe due to the never-ending crime that is going on in the streets, and especially in the subway, and the cost of living. All right. So Younger is, you know, talking about some of these issues. And the mayor, Mayor Adams, you know, basically says that in terms of crime, that crime is going down under his leadership. But he did have a caveat, and that is that the perception is it's bad. And people in the room definitely feel that, right? You know, you got different people living in different boroughs, right? You have Manhattan borough, you have the Queens borough, you have Brooklyn borough, Bronx borough, borough, I should say, borough, Staten Island. But I would say majority of the people that were in that room were either from Queens, mostly from Brooklyn or Manhattan. All right. So there's a lot of crime that's going on in the subways, and you hear it in the news all the time. And he was saying that the crime that you're hearing in the news, especially before he took over, was only the surface of all this other stuff that was going on. And he was showing statistics like once he became mayor, how many guns they were able to get off the street. He used the number of 6,000 or something like that. I don't have a context on, you know, of if that's good, bad, indifferent, whatever. I don't know. But I'm assuming, you know, just giving the benefit of the doubt that compared to what de Blasio was doing, must be an improvement. But the perception is that we are seeing more crime. We feel more crime. People in New York are guarded now because of what's going on in the subway and the stabbings. And many people are saying this is like the 70s. This is like the 80s, especially ones that are older in the room that remember pre-Giuliani. Now, Giuliani came in the 90s. So, you know, and it was the 70s inflation and the 80s erosion of the city, where people were seeing that New York's kind of rotting away, rotting from inside. You know, the Big Apple's rotting from the core, right? So, so he had this point about perception, and that the crime is declining from where it was, but it's still there. All right. So what is amazing with Adams that I noticed, and you don't see it so much in the news when you're just watching the sound bites on, let's say, New York One, or, you know, some local news station from New York, or even, you know, in the national news, let's say CNN. Mayor Adams has the ability to kind of diffuse and personalize an issue, and you don't feel so negative towards his policies. He has a gift in this. It doesn't come off in the news. It comes off in a room when you're in there. Maybe it's because he was sitting in a chair and he wasn't at a lectern, and you know, speaking, you know, with a bunch of reporters in the front, you know, and all this. So maybe he felt more comfortable. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know, because it is a different setting. That could be it. But his main point when it came to crime was that it's going down, that more police officers are on the street, and that when he was transitioning to becoming mayor, de Blasio's policies were basically stand down when there was crime. If there was petty crime, stand down. If there was loitering, stand down with the police. So there was a lot of standing down, and he makes this point because there was so much standing down during the de Blasio years and that early transition within his administration, that the lawbreakers started to get emboldened, on top of having Albany not really, setting strong policies, being tough on crime. Instead, they were weak on crime, and it led to this cascade of additional crime that was happening. So in short, by having the police stand down during the de Blasio years and the early months of the administration in Adams's, lawbreakers were emboldened, and it got worse. And as it was gaining steam with you started seeing more stabbings, more pushing onto the subway tracks and killings that way. So people's perception, I think, is right, because it's still happening. And it wasn't anywhere what it was when I moved to New York 14 years ago. All right. So, it's worse than 14 years ago for sure. All right. Is it getting better than the de Blasio years? Maybe a little bit. The perception is that we still need to go a lot farther in terms of getting that feeling of being safe during the day and at night. You feel a little bit safer during the day, but at night, not so much. You take that train station late at night, after 10 or, or even 2 in the morning or whatever, anything goes, even in a relatively safe area, let's say in Manhattan, relative to, let's say, the Bronx, right? You wouldn't want to take, a train station, let's say at 2 in the morning in the Bronx versus, most places in Manhattan, you feel much more safe, let's see, 14 years ago, 10 years ago. Nowadays, it doesn't matter where it is, it's unsafe. That's a problem. All right. So he spun it while he was in the chair being asked these questions, that crime's going down and that guns are coming off the street and all this stuff, right? And that he has this policy, and I have seen this, where more police officers are on the subway, all right, on the actual train or at the station. You are seeing that. He also said that, and I agree with him on this, I haven't seen as many. I still see them, but it used to be way more with de Blasio. Homeless in the subway station, kind of encamped. All right. Now, what he did was he took them off the streets and put them into housing, and taking city money and probably working with the different nonprofits to be able to house these people. That pivots into this other issue that the city is seeing with people that are homeless in a way. It's the immigrants that are coming from a porous border being shipped from the southern states. And the southern states have been having this problem for a long time, for many years. And the Trump administration was saying, okay, we have to build the wall. Now, it goes back to the concept that you don't have a country if you don't control your currency or you control your border. All right. we have a porous border. And it is a fallacy to say that the border can be open to anybody and as many people that want to flow in, all right? Because if the economy can't absorb the number of people that are flowing in, then you are actually going to break with the benefits of an American society, right? So you have to have a titration of immigration. You have to have, you know, a certain flow of diversity coming into the country, but it can't be unchecked. One, because you have to vet because of terrorism. You have to vet because of diseases. You have to vet for certain levels of education. Because if you just open up the border and it just flows in at whatever the natural rate would be, without having, you know, controlled immigration, what will happen is that the society in the United States would start to have problems. They'll have social service problems, they'll have housing problems, they'll have economic problems, they'll have health problems. A lot of issues where you have an unfettered access to the border, all right? And this goes into what the globalists want in terms of you don't control your currency and you don't control your border, and therefore you don't have a country, all right? Mayor Adams, now Mayor de Blasio was for an open border. Mayor Adams is also for an open border, all right? How Mayor Adams is dealing with it in the room was when he was asked this question about immigration and these busing from, let's say, Texas or Arizona or Florida or whatever. So as they get to New York, he's trying to get them into housing and not on the streets. In the room, he was saying, well, you know, we should just absorb them, without really sitting and really thinking about, you can't just absorb as many that want to flow in, because one, you don't have the housing, two, you don't have the jobs, and three, you don't have the resources, right? And he even admitted that he doesn't have the resources because he had to do an emergency request to the federal government to help them. So what does he do is he pivots and says it's the blame of the southern states, not them absorbing it. Yet they've been absorbing the costs of unfettered immigration policy, porous border, for years. So these governors from these southern states are saying, you know what, you need to start seeing what we've been seeing for years and push it off. So I think that Mayor Adams was wrong to start blaming the southern states for New York's problem with these bust immigrants, all right? His thinking process is that we can absorb at any flow rate. We have to titrate this. If you don't titrate it, it's going to mess up the chemistry of the society. It's going to mess up the economics. And it's a very simple concept, all right? If you have a tub, all right, and the tub has a certain amount of water, all right, and that is your equilibrium of your economy, all right? Or let's say, let me rephrase that. The water is the number of people in the tub, and the temperature of the water is your equilibrium for your economy, all right? And you have cold water, all right, flowing in at a certain rate. But you also have an ability to heat the water that's in the tub. And the cold water that is flowing in is raising the tub, right? But it's also cooling, but the temperature of the heater is just set right that whatever the cold water is that's cooling down the temperature that's in the tub. The heater increases the temperature to keep it at equilibrium, a set temperature. Okay, that's the economy, the temperature of the economy. It's not too cold, it's not too hot, right? But the flow, the flow keeps them getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The problem comes in. Now, if you have a flow rate that is just right, the water is also evaporating. Those are deaths in society. The water is evaporating, or immigration outside of the country. All right. But if you turn on that water spigot, that faucet, too high, your economy starts to cool down. The temperature of the tub starts to get colder. You can't change the temperature of the natural heating of the economy. All right. There's a natural growth rate. And as you have that spigot or faucet filling the tub at a faster rate, it starts to overflow because the evaporation isn't as fast as what's coming in. All right. This is the problem when you have politicians speaking about immigration. They have no understanding of differential equations. They have no understanding of flow rates. They have no understanding of changing variables over time. People that say that America can absorb an unlimited amount of people is not really looking at the problem correctly. There's a point where it breaks and you can't fix it once it breaks. And so controlled immigration is what will strengthen our country. Uncontrolled immigration will not. It will break the country. It's very simple. He fails on this. But most liberals, most Democrats that are for immigration, uncontrolled immigration, fail on this very point. So Mayor Adams is just as wrong as de Blasio on this issue. That the society should just absorb them. He didn't give a damn about the problem until it was on his doorstep. Meanwhile, Florida and Texas has been dealing with this problem for years, and the federal government wasn't listening. So you know what? I think it was pretty wise of the states of the South to move the immigrants to these other states, especially blue states, so they understand what the problem is. Because when it's not in your backyard, you don't care. And so he wants to move these individuals and some of the homeless into kind of like government housing or low income housing. The problem that is happening, and he mentioned this, is people in New York don't want to say my backyard, not in my backyard kind of concept. And most people would say this, because when you have that housing next to your property or in your village or around you, your values will go down. The value of your property will go down. So that's a big problem, So housing is an issue in New York. There's too many people and there's not enough housing available to keep prices at a reasonable level. So you're always at an elevated price level if you're trying to buy or if you're trying to rent or whatever, because the amount of people that are trying to rent or buy is far more than the amount of units that are available. So it's always elevated. So to fix this problem, it's to actually build more. He didn't say that. It was more like, we have to find cheaper housing for the homeless and for these new immigrants that a lot of them don't have any real skills. You know, not every restaurant needs them, right? And then we're going into a downturn in the economy where a lot of tech workers are getting laid off. Believe me, most of the people that are coming through the border are not tech workers. So they don't really have the skills that a modern society really needs. Yes, we have to have housing for them, but we have to have a plan, a substantial plan to have more housing for the productive citizens of New York City, right? The ones that are educated, the ones that have jobs, the ones that are paying the taxes, all right? He didn't have an answer for that. He only had an answer for the ones that need social services. So I think he failed on that point. So he failed on the housing point, and he failed on the crime point. Yes, it's going down. He's putting police on the street. You see them more often. The standing down of certain situations is going down. You know, the police are becoming more engaged. He says that he supports funding the police. And I want to tease this out because this is a little bit more complicated issue than this Republican, Democrat, fund the police, don't fund the police. All right. On this, he's for funding the police. I mean, he's NYPD, you know, so I can get that. I can understand that. Plus, he's the mayor. At the surface, you have a group that's saying don't fund the police, and you have a group that says fund the police. In general, most of them are saying, let me rephrase it. Most of the Republicans are saying fund the police. Most of the centrist Democrats are saying fund the police. You have a fringe group that is saying defund the police on the Democrat side. All right. There's a bigger issue here. I think that it's not fund the police or defund the police. It's fund them properly. And what I mean by that is that to make sure, because I'm Gen X, to make sure that we listen to the lessons learned from Ayn Rand and from Orwell, that we don't have an Atlas Shrugged and we don't have a 1984. The only way to prevent that is to make sure that the funding that we provide the police is not to allow for technologies that lead to a surveillance state, such as cameras, artificial intelligence, drones. I am for funding the police for their pension, for more police on the street in societies that have crime problems, you know, like the inner cities, you know, like Chicago, New York, Detroit. But so pay the officers more, have more officers on the beat, but reduce the surveillance technology in society. Cut the cameras, cut the artificial intelligence, cut the drones, cut the military grade equipment. That part of defund the police, we should be doing. We need to defund 1984. We need to defund Atlas Shrugged, all right, to prevent it from happening. These are the lessons learned in the literature that we read in school. All right, that's the reason why we read them. It wasn't just to get credit. We get a grade so you can go to college, right? You read those to learn what the authors were trying to warn society on. A surveillance state, a minority report can only happen when you fund it. So defunding these types of initiatives within local municipalities needs to be done, because part of the BioPatriot Act is more surveillance technology. So defunding this part of it needs to happen. Putting more police on the street, giving them proper training, making sure they're paid better, making sure that their pension is better, that I'm for. Surveillance state, I'm against. And it should be fought to make sure it doesn't happen. Not with a pen, but by the citizenry that's being surveilled. And this is a lesson learned from 1984. So, when you have the Democrats say defund the police, they're talking about less police on the force, right? And kind of gut them. What we need to do is not do that. What we need to do is defund the FBI, defund the CIA, defund the NSA, and all the things that started to balloon out right after 9/11. But we don't hear that from the Democrats. We don't even hear that from the Republicans. That's what we should be defunding and deconstructing, is the CIA and the FBI. But because Mayor Adams is a mayor of New York City and not part of the federal government, that's too lofty of an idea. But he's for funding the police. But he's also for funding surveillance technologies, which is an element of the BioPatriot Act. That's a problem. And no one in that room, in the Harvard Hall, where just that room alone had 250 people in it. Multiple people had multiple degrees. So at the minimum, just in that room alone, there were 500 degrees. 500 degrees at a minimum. And no one could write the question and articulate what the problem is in terms of funding municipalities. Didn't they read 1984? Don't they understand that never-ending liberalism will lead you to Atlas Shrugged? That's a problem. That's a problem. So the two big issues, immigration, he took questions on, and the crime, he took questions on. The cost of the city, he didn't really address, to my memory, adequately about it and how to solve that problem. He did state, and I think it's true, that because, and people need to pay attention to this, because I think every city, every major city is going to have this problem. LA, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York City, Miami, Houston, all these major cities, their COVID money from the federal government is ending. A lot of that money was kind of keeping things afloat within the city, even though they were running deficits. The deficits weren't as bad. a lot of these cities are going to be falling off a cliff because they don't have the COVID money. So their deficits are going to get worse. And Mayor Adams talks about this, that the city has major deficit issues. All right. So probably, he didn't state this, but probably a big, one way to solve this problem or reduce the problem is to raise taxes. Another part is to reduce city services. So on one side of the mouth, he's saying that we have to be, very generous to the ones that are coming to this country illegally. And then, oh, by the way, if you're here legally and you're paying your taxes, you're going to get less services and we're going to charge you more on your taxes. So making the city more livable in terms of cost of living, he hasn't solved that problem. That problem has not been solved. Yes, it's, bringing, jobs to the city. He did say that there were new, corporations coming to the city all the time. It was kind of a very, I don't know, broad brush, simplistic mentioning of it in the room today. Last point that I want to make, and I think I agree with him very much so on this one point. He was stating that people need to get back to work instead of working at home or being afraid of COVID. And this is what I said: people need to stop being COVID-19 lazy. I did a video about COVID-19 lazy, right? Everyone remembers it, right? And I said, you know what? Stop being afraid and just move on with your life. Now, he used the term, we navigated through COVID, and we'll be okay. I think he's right. We're navigating through COVID and we'll be okay. There's some complications to that because there's going to be long-term side effects because of AIDS-like syndrome or autoimmune disorders, long COVID, or another release of other cocktails. But he's right on the sense that, we've navigated through this part of the COVID crisis. And in the room, many people don't have masks on, but it was peppered with people that did. Some of them were elderly, maybe they are immune compromised, so you could understand. There were quite a few, noticeably, that were younger than Gen X that were wearing masks. It didn't seem like they had an autoimmune disorder. They didn't seem like there were too many of them. This is an element that I'm starting to see in society, especially in New York and in Boston, where and I'm sure that people would agree probably also in DC or Chicago, but you're seeing an element of people that are afraid, or it's a badge of some sort of liberalism where they want it to never end. So what happens is that there's a laziness that takes place, and it gives them an excuse not to go to work, gives them an excuse to only be on a Zoom call and never be in the office. And what the mayor stated tonight, I think, is 100% right. Humans need human interaction, and it has to be in person to have a more productive organization. Yes, you can do things remotely, but the human condition has evolved not to be remote and on a computer screen, but to be in person. And that there was probably a lot of people that ended up getting depression because of COVID, because they stayed at home the whole time. So people are afraid, and they don't want, they're starting to get lazy, and they think that it's going to be more productive for them to be at home, and they don't realize that it's actually antisocial and it's not good for your brain and it makes you depressed. One, and two, if you never leave your house, what happens is that you're you're not exposing yourself to the natural antigens that are out there in society, and you end up having a weaker immune system because you're just not moving around in your society. So, and then he made a statement I think was funny, is that you can't come to work Monday through Friday because you're afraid of the virus, but you go out, on the weekend to the bars, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right? So I think he's making a point that people are using it as an excuse, right? Another point that people need to realize is the economic clustering that happens in a society. When people go to work, they normally go and buy a coffee. That coffee is paying for the salary of the person that's making the coffee at the place that you're buying the coffee from. That place is ordering material from a vendor, and that vendor is paying people. So if you just stay at home, you're having a society that is losing its economic clustering, and you become less economically productive, less economically vibrant, and the tax base goes down because you actually have less economic activity that's taking place. So all you fucking liberals out there that keep on putting on your mask and thinking that you're more productive by being at home, you're actually hurting society. You're hurting society because you're destroying the economic clustering. And that's what people want you, that are high up in the order, want you to do. They want to destroy this country. They want to weaken the border, they want to weaken the currency, and weaken the economy. And you freaking liberals are playing right into their game. So Mayor Adams was right. Get to work. Stop being COVID-19 lazy, as Dr. Paul Cottrell says. That is my critique, my observation of the actual event that took place at the Harvard Hall that I was at. And it was simulcasted into other rooms within the Harvard New York Club. I don't know, in the Harvard Hall was 250 people. I don't know how many, it probably was close to 300 or 400 people that were there. That were watching this thing. I'm glad I saw it. It was for a little bit over an hour. It was a little late. It was like 5 minutes late. And I think it went on a little bit, 5 minutes beyond the normal time. It was interesting to see. The room was very charged against the mayor because of crime and cost of living. When he started speaking and when he left, he was able to diffuse that anger. He didn't know that the anger was in that room, to my knowledge. All right. That is a unique leadership quality that you don't normally see. So I'll give him that. And I give him the idea that, you know what, these COVID-19 lazy people that keep on wearing their masks, you know what, you're not doing yourself a favor and you're not doing society a favor. Get back to work. Stop being a pussy. I just wish that he had a better solution and he went into detail on how he's going to make this city more livable in terms of cost of living. He didn't really go into any level of insight on that. And I think he's wrong on the immigration policy. You can't have unfettered access to the country. We need to have controlled immigration, legal immigration, not illegal immigration. And just to say that there's a lot of atrocities in the world, and all the atrocities, the solution to all the ills of the world must be to immigrate to the United States. The United States can't, it wouldn't be the United States if we allowed that to happen, all right? We wouldn't have an economy anymore. It'd be non-functional. And this is the problem with the Democratic Party. Not living in reality. That's my take on Mayor Adams, my mayor in New York City. Thank you for listening to my diatribe. And I am going to also do a video in a couple days about some books that I'm reading, and the need to, I think, actually become a little bit more forceful on moving towards this going out of the post-COVID era. And so there's kind of a philosophical underpinning that I'm starting to develop, for this post-COVID era, because I kind of ushered in the COVID era, warning people that the wave was coming, back in January of 2020. And a lot of people didn't believe me, when it happened. And I said there were going to be multiple waves, and that happened. Well, we're going into a post-COVID era, and there's a lot of things. There's a sociological aspect to it. There's the biological aspect to it, and then there's the Patriot Act aspect to it, where it's dealing with civil liberties. So I'll give you my take on the post-COVID era. So please support my work by subscribing to all my channels. I have 3 YouTube channels: Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please subscribe to all of those channels, all 6. And please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and purchase the products that I offer. I offer C60 in 2 ounce, 4 ounce, and 8 ounce. I offer a plethora of nano silver products like toothpaste, liquids, gels, lozenges, and soaps. And I offer all natural deodorants in citrus and in peppermint, tea tree. And I also have probiotics. This one is from Amio, and this probiotic is in a tablet form, or a capsule. It's a capsule. These capsules. And I also have a powdered one from Boomer Products. So you can either get your probiotic in a capsule or probiotic in a powder form. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the probiotic from my store. This one's in the capsule form. Or if you prefer the powdered, you can get that also on my store that is provided by Boomer. Thank you for listening. And again, to help support my work, please also subscribe to Patreon. Now, what I'm going to do on Patreon is I'm going to be doing a market cap, a market review of the S&P 500, and explain to you what the Federal Reserve just did today. They raised rates and what that means to the movement of markets. So I'll give you my perspective on where the economy is going. That will be released on Patreon only. All right. So if you're a subscriber to Patreon, you're going to benefit from what I'm going to say about the markets on that video. All right. If you're not a Patreon subscriber, you should go to my Patreon account and subscribe, so you can get an understanding of what is going to be happening in the next few weeks in terms of the macro market, in terms of housing prices, in terms of interest on debt, in terms of unemployment. that subscription that you're going to, that new subscription that you're going to make on Patreon, it's a nominal fee, will make you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you listen to what I have to say, if you have a decent amount of money in the market. If you don't have a lot of money in the market, you will save thousands or make thousands of dollars. So depending on how much you have in the market, depends on how much. It's going to be thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands that you're going to make from what I'm going to say for a few dollars per subscription. All right. So believe me, you're going to get a lot for your money when you listen to that video. So please go to Patreon and subscribe, and it'll be the best money that you spend in the last, I don't know, 60 to 90 days. All right. Thank you for listening and have a nice night.